Hello, this is Samantha Jones, and this is a lesson plan for advanced teaching and assessment. I will do a lesson plan over 4th grade, and the subject will be science. We'll start off with section 1, which is the learning objectives. The Common Core standards that I'll be using are Science LS 2.4.1, where students will be able to classify vertebrates into major subgroups, which include mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles. I will also be incorporating the Common Core Standard of Literacy, ELA-RS 12.4.6, that compares and contrasts a first-hand and second-hand account of the same event or topic. They'll be able to describe the differences in focus and the information provided. What is your objective for students learning this lesson? The students will be able to categorize the different species of vertebrates into 5 major groups. The student will also be able to compare and contrast by stating the similarities and differences among these 5 major groups and what makes a certain animal species fit into that group. Why I have chosen these objectives. I chose these objectives because it is part of the standards for learning at this grade level. It also gives the students a chance to do cross-education by being able to incorporate another Common Core standard, in this case, literacy. I've also chosen this standard to help the students communicate and engage in the classroom with other students, helping them prepare for the future grades and working with other students to reach a common goal. We'll go ahead and move on to the second part of the lesson plans, where the student grouping. How will you group students for instruction? To begin this lesson, I will start out by instructing the class as a whole group discussion, discussing each group and examples of vertebrate species with their characteristics to why they fit in these groups. After a whole group discussion, I will then split the students into small groups of 3. To conclude the activity, I will bring the students back to a whole group discussion to allow them to report back to the teacher their findings. After students report back their findings to the class as a whole, each student will then be evaluated by doing an independent activity. Why have you chosen this grouping? I chose this grouping to allow the students the opportunity to work with each other and get away from the standard teacher lecture instruction. It allows students to engage in the lesson and be able to interact with other students to obtain the certain goal. In this case, placing the appropriate species in the correct major group. It allows students to engage in the lesson and be able to interact with other students to obtain a certain goal. This grouping allows the teacher to have the instruction in the beginning to make sure the students have the material they need to be able to put the species in the appropriate groups, and then allows the students to do some out loud working together as the teacher can walk around and evaluate to instruct when needed while the students are in these small groups. Allowing the students then to report back will allow the teacher to clarify any misunderstandings before the teacher evaluates them individually. Then we'll move on to section 3 of the lesson plan, method instructional strategies. What teaching method will I use for this lesson? For this lesson, I will incorporate several different types of teaching methods. At the beginning of class, I will lecture with discussion to teach the students the material to be able to group these species. I will then split the students into small groups to allow small group discussion and allow the students to use brainstorming while determine which species goes into which major vertebrate group. The students will use a hands-on method, placing the appropriate animal in the appropriate chart fields. After the students are done placing animals in the appropriate fields, the students will then report back to me as a whole group discussion again to report their findings and answers. The Marzano method I will use in this lesson will be to identify the similarities and differences between each group so that the students understand why that species goes into that major group. I will be able to then collaborate with the students, working together to put all these species together into one large chart on the board classifying their similarities and differences. Why I have chosen these methods. I've chosen these methods to allow the students to have several different methods of learning, to be able to relate to all students and their different ways of learning, to give each student the chance to thoroughly understand the material. By using these different types of methods, it gives me, as a teacher, a chance to relate information in different ways to help it obtain a certain goal, to be able to classify the species in 5 major vertebrate groups, and to describe their similarities and differences, to do well on the individual evaluation at the end of the lesson.